Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the first event in the winter 2023 McKercher Lecture Series lineup. In case you don't know me, I'm the Dean, and as my joke always goes, where have you been? All right. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we're on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis people. We pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and we reaffirm our relationship with one another. I want to thank McKercher LLP for their continuing sponsorship and support of our lecture series, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Kit McGuinness, partner at McKercher LLP, to bring remarks. It's also great to welcome alumni back to the college and always to welcome somebody on their first visit to Saskatchewan. I guarantee it won't be a last. Guaranteed. Okay, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm a partner at the Saskatoon office and practice primarily in labor and employment. We're very proud of our relationship with the college, and it's so nice to see some of the faces that we saw at the recruitment event this weekend, and our continued opportunity to play our part to provide timely and interesting lectures. A special thank you to you, those who attend. Your interest and engagement is why we find these lectures so important. In the interest of time, I think we'll jump right into the panel discussion, so I'll hand it over to Professor Bengtson.
Thank you, Kit, for the introduction. It is on? Okay. My name's Clayton Bengtson. I'm the chair of the Speakers Committee here at the college, and today I will serve as your moderator for the day's events. Today's event is intended as an informal conversation with three of Canada's top young lawyers. We want students of our school to be given the opportunity to learn about some of the unique career paths one can take within the law, and to hear from leaders within their respective fields. I will begin with a very brief introduction of our three honored guests, and of course more details will flow through our conversation. So I'll begin with Iris Fischer at the end of the line here. Iris is a partner at the Blake's office in Toronto. In 2021, she was recognized as a Lexpert Rising Star, one of Canada's leading lawyers under 40. Michelle Biddulph, to my left, is an associate lawyer at Greenspan, Humphrey, and Weinstein LLP in Toronto, and a graduate of this university, receiving her JD in 2014. In fact, I believe you were our gold medalist that year. So she was a medalist. Thank you for joining us. And finally, in the middle, Breanna Needham, an associate at DLA Piper, Canada, also a graduate of this college, receiving her JD in the year 2015. So thank you all for joining us, to Breanna and Michelle for rejoining us and taking time out of your position as advisors to the Jessup Moot, and to Iris for joining us for the first time here in Saskatchewan. Without further ado, I will jump into the questioning phase. And my plan is to pose a question or a series of questions, and then turn over the mics to our panelists and let the conversation ensue. Hopefully, it'll turn into a nice, natural conversation. So we'll begin with an introduction and a discussion of practices. So tell us about your path to and within the legal profession. In doing so, please describe your educational background and what inspired or led you to study the practice of law. So, what factors weighed into your decision to attend law school? Was it something that you were interested in from day one, or did you come to law later in life? I'll start with Michelle, and then let the other panelists furnish their responses.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I can tell you, I argue in front of the Supreme Court. I'm not nervous at all, but you guys have me sweating talking about myself. So I'll try my best to tell you a little bit about myself. My path to law, I think, was fairly standard for a lot of people in here. I did an undergrad at the U of S here in international studies, so sort of poli-sci, international relations kind of thing. And like most poli-sci grads, I had no job prospects after. So I decided, like most poli-sci grads, I would go to law school. And the U of S was the only law school that I applied to because I was from Saskatoon and I really wanted to stay in Saskatoon. I really loved the city. And within law school, I was certain when I first attended that I was going to be a legislative drafter. I didn't want to do corporate law, and I absolutely did not want to be in the courtroom. I was terrified of public speaking. And it wasn't until I joined the Jessup Moot team when I was in my second year that I realized there's nothing more fun than litigation. I absolutely love being in the courtroom, despite being a pretty shy person myself. But my path to being a criminal defense lawyer, which is what I am today, took even longer because I had no real passion for criminal law in law school. I took it, it was fine, I had many great profs here, but it wasn't until I was doing a clerkship at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal when I started working on all the criminal files, and I realized just how many depths of intellectual layers there are to every single criminal case that comes before the courts. There's charter issues, there's substantive legal issues, there's evidentiary issues in every case, and I loved how complex they were. And so that was what made me want to be a defense lawyer. And then I was lucky enough to clerk at the Supreme Court after my clerkship at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, which I clerked for Justice Rothstein and Justice Brown there, but managed to get along well with a lot of the other judges, including Justice Moldaver. Justice Moldaver is very good friends with Brian Greenspan, who I was very lucky at the end of my clerkship that Brian Greenspan happened to be looking for an associate. And so that's how I ended up at my firm in Toronto. It was just complete luck and happenstance that I managed to fall into something that was great for me. So I wish I could tell you it was planned out, but for me, I was just lucky and it worked out along the way.
Serendipity.
Well, that's a tough one to follow because I think Michelle Biddulph and Professor Dwight Newman are two of the smartest people that I know and possibly in the entire world. So I'll try to live up to that. For me, I started my university career here at the College of Agriculture and Bioresources. And I admittedly went and did my undergrad there and got a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture with a major in agronomy because it was the college that offered the most scholarships in first year and was therefore the one that I could afford to attend. I'm a first-generation university student and also a first-generation professional law student in my family. So having the funds to be able to attend school was an important consideration for me. While I did my undergrad there, I also did the professional communication option with the Ron and Jane Graham Center for the study of communication at the College of Engineering. And it was in working with the professors there who were and probably, if they're the same professors, still are amazing, that I really, found my love of reading, research, and writing. And I said, this is what I want to get paid to do for the rest of my life. However, like many people who finish undergrad, when I finished my degree, I couldn't necessarily afford to return to school. So I took a couple years off and I worked in the agriculture industry, and then I returned to law school. And again, during law school, much like Michelle, I didn't decide on a career path. I was learning, I was enjoying the experience, trying a bit of this and a bit of that. I ended up doing the 2L recruit through Calgary and Toronto because the year I did it, they're kind of run on similar timing and the call day was the same day. And when we were still in school, YOLO was still very much a phrase you would use. So I chose Toronto in a YOLO moment, and I've stayed ever since. I started out in practice at McCarthy Tatro, and then I moved to a litigation boutique. And then I practiced for a couple of years at Borden Ladner Gervais in Toronto, and now I'm with DLA Piper. In terms of doing investigations, fraud, and misconduct work, something that just developed over the course of my career. When I was a 2L summer, and even at the start of my articling, I was so sure I was going to be a corporate lawyer. I didn't even do a litigation rotation during my 2L summer because I was absolutely sure that's what I was going to do. And then while I was articling, I think it was October or November of my articles, they needed someone to be on a trial team, and I just finished working on a deal that had closed, so I had capacity and time to assist, and that was a game changer for me. I had such an amazing time. I learned so much. I went on to do several more trials during my articling, and I knew litigation was for me. In terms of the injunctions and investigations practice I have now, that's something I developed over time, over the first few years of my career, and now I just solely focus on matters with misconduct elements in them as much as I can, but a lot of strong focus on research, reading, and writing still, which is, I still can't believe I get paid to do this every day, so.
Thank you.
Well, I love those stories. First of all, thank you for having me here, and I'm really enjoying my first time in Saskatchewan. My story is a little different in that I was one of those people who pretty much always thought that I was going to be a lawyer and knew that I wanted to be a litigator. And maybe it's because, I grew up in Richmond Hill, Ontario, which is, about 45 minutes north of Toronto. And my family came from Israel, where I was born, and I moved to the Toronto area when I was about 5. And there was a lot of vigorous debate in our family, around our dinner table, lots of debating, lots of encouragement to take opportunities for advocacy, lots of focus on reading and writing and those kinds of things as well. And I don't know if my parents suggested to me that law might be good for me or if I came up with it, but one way or another, by the time I was in high school, I was pretty focused on that as a path. And I went to U of T for my undergrad, and I did 2 years of a degree in psychology, knowing that I wanted to go to law school. And then I discovered that you could actually go to McGill Law without having completed an undergrad. And this part my parents definitely had a part in, because they encouraged me to apply. And even though I was in the middle of my sort of second year exams over Christmas, and I was like, guys, I really don't have time for this. They said, no, just send in this one application. So I did, and I got in, and then I had to decide what to do. And I ended up moving to Montreal and going to law school at McGill, which was wonderful for a host of reasons, including that I met my husband there. So it was, I guess my parents were right. But I loved law school. I know we'll have more opportunities to talk about that. But I mooted. I always knew that I wanted to be a litigator. And when it was time to look at jobs, I applied to a whole bunch of places, and I ended up at Blake's in Toronto, and I've been there ever since. What I didn't know until I went through that process was that you could actually be a Bay Street litigator and have a significant part of your practice focused on public law. And in my case, I'm a media lawyer, among other things, and so I spend a lot of my time on freedom of expression, charter issues, and I also have a big chunk of my practice is investigations and white collar. So in some ways we all have a bit of overlap, but when I realized that I could do those things at Blake's, I kind of never looked back, and so I'm also a commercial litigator, but I kind of pinch myself often when I realize that the kinds of cases that I get to do are always fascinating, and I really love what I do. So.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much. That was an excellent start to the questions. So you're a white collar crim lawyer. I'm actually a Blake's person myself from way back. Do you deal with Mark Morrison?
Oh yeah, I work closely with Mark. So Mark heads up our business crimes and investigations group, and I lead our group in Toronto. So Mark's a great guy.
Well, pass along my greetings.
I will.
Second question for the group. Tell us about your daily life as a lawyer. Where does your expertise lie? What does a typical or normal day, week, or month look like in your practice, if there is such a thing? And what's the favorite and least favorite part of your role as a lawyer? Let's start with Iris and make our way back.
Okay, sounds good. Typical day, it's a little hard to answer because they're often atypical. But when I think about what I did this morning before I came here, that's actually probably a pretty good will give you a sense. I'm on a lot of calls, a lot of video calls, and they range from I'm dealing with a crisis type situation right now in our public sector practice. So part of what I do kind of combines my media law practice and my investigations practice into a focus on public and political law type matters. So we have something going on. So there were lots of calls and drafts going back and forth and emails. At the same time, I'm preparing for an appeal at the Federal Court of Appeal next Monday, Tuesday. So working with my associate, trying to get supplementary book of authorities out, trying to focus on a legal issue. We decided we needed to amend our notice of constitutional question and get that out today. And that's a pretty good example. Like there are days where I may be in court or in discoveries. There are days where I'm, advising new clients who have a new issue. Later today, I'll probably work on a constitutional opinion that has to be done by the end of the week. So it's a variety of different things. In terms of, I think part of the question was favorite thing and least favorite thing. It's again kind of the flip side of the coin. I mean, I love being in court. Every time I do it, I remember that this is why I do what I do. But one of the things that was surprising to me was that I actually love the trusted advisor role that we tend to develop with our clients, and learning about their business and giving them advice to help them get where they want to go, whether that's avoiding a dispute or minimizing the reputational harm, whatever it is. That's very satisfying in a way that I perhaps didn't expect. I love that it's always different, and I'm never bored. It would be nice if it was occasionally slower paced. So it's both great that it's not, because I'm never bored, but stress management is a big issue in a busy law practice, and we don't really talk very much about how that impacts litigators. There was a great article by former Chief Justice Strathy of the Ontario Court of Appeal about a year ago about mental health for litigators, and I would encourage people to read it. We don't talk about it, and it's a stressful practice, and you do have to manage that. So it would be nice to disconnect a little more sometimes, but that's probably as far as I would go.
My answer is very similar in that day to day, it really is the lawyer answer of it depends. And that's the best answer, especially if you're litigating in the type of practice I have. And I always joke that I've only got 2 speeds, 0 and 100, because when an injunction comes in the door, you have to drop everything and just get it done. And they really seem to like to pop up like during long weekends. But when things are relaxed, then I tend to try to take it easy, read things that I'm interested in, keep up on developments in the law, that kind of thing. So I say my practice is very up and down in a way, but it tends to come in cycles. And for example, I can tell you, like, so far this year, last week I spent 3.5 days in cross-examinations. Later today, I'll be writing an appeal factum. Tomorrow, I'll be dealing with some coordination with the client on another matter and drafting an opinion, and then I'll spend 3 more days in cross-examinations. The following week, I'll be drafting another couple of factums. Then I've got an arbitration for a week. Then I've got a further set of long motions for a few days, and then I'll be prepping for a trial in the spring. So every kind of set of weeks or cycles is a little bit of something different, and it's great because, as Iris mentioned, it's never boring. It's a great way to, ensure you're constantly learning something, constantly engaging, you're constantly working with other people, and that's because you can never know all of the things in law. There are just too many things to know. No one knows all the things, not even Dwight and Michelle. And so that's why I think collaboration is so important. It is a big part of my practice, because you can only be an expert in your very narrow area of expertise, and you need to rely on many of the other people that you work with. In terms of, I think it was least favorite and most favorite, my most favorite thing, I think, is the collaboration I just mentioned. I work with some amazing, very chill people, and part of working together and coming up with different ideas is very important to me, because working alone in a silo without different viewpoints or different thoughts on something I don't think it's effective advocacy, and I don't think it's any way to live your life or to practice law. And having colleagues that you can lean on is very important too, to allow you to focus on the type of work you want to do. So for example, I can say to the guy I work with, hey T2s, I need to draft a factum today, you're just going to have to deal with this. And that push-pull really helps, I think, keep practice manageable. If you don't have colleagues you can rely on, it's much, much harder to do the job. In terms of least favorite thing, again, it's a people dynamic. I find often, or not often, but more often than I would like, there are lawyers who forget that the adversarial part of the legal system is supposed to be in the process itself, not as between the lawyers or the sets of counsel. And when you forget that, it brings all sorts of problems to the dynamic. It makes things more hostile than they need to be. It doesn't serve the best interests of the client. And so it's not effective advocacy in the same way if you have a lawyer who is just determined to fight on everything. And I think that really feeds into what Iris was just saying about mental health. And I didn't come up with this example myself. But I've heard it said, if you're a doctor, yes, there's other problems with the job, but no one's trying to deconstruct the knee while you fix it. And that's very much what litigation can be like. The process is already very difficult in and of itself, so there's no need to needlessly make it more adversarial or hostile. And when people do that, whether because it's part of their personality or because they think it's making them a more effective advocate, that would be my least favorite thing.
Okay, and so for me, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so there's inherently some unpredictability in every day of the job. You don't know when you're getting the call from the station that your client's been arrested, or you have to run in and do a bail hearing. So that sort of unpredictability aside, most of my day-to-day is spent writing factums. I do a lot of appeal work. So writing factums is very much reading transcripts, doing case law research, writing technical arguments. I do a fair decent amount of trial work too, so that means I spend a lot of my day reviewing Crown disclosure, going over the evidence against my client to see what can I possibly argue here. Are there any creative arguments that I can make? So a lot of it is just sitting in front of a computer and typing every day. A lot of time is, of course, spent on the phone, with clients and Crowns and whatnot. But a pretty typical day for me is in the office. I'm not one of those defense lawyers who's spending, 29 out of 30 days a month in trial. I don't have the energy for that. With respect to favorite and least favorite parts about my job, my favorite part is the firm that I work for is, to, I guess, put it arrogantly, probably one of the top criminal defense firms in Canada. And so they get some incredibly cool work, meaning that I get to work on legal issues that are very high profile or perhaps precedent setting. I get to do a lot of Supreme Court work, which is fantastic. So my favorite part is just the sheer quality of the work that I get at my firm. My least favorite part is sort of the inherent pressures that come with being a defense lawyer. Because unlike other lawyers, perhaps like my colleagues here who might be dealing with people's money, I'm dealing with people's liberty every day. And it's huge responsibility to know if you mess this up, someone's going to jail and their life is ruined. So having the confidence in yourself to always be acting in the client's best interest and perhaps deal with unreasonable client expectations or reasonable client fears, I find that really difficult every day and very emotionally draining. So I think for me, that's probably my least favorite part about it.
Well, thank you very much for that round of responses. I'm going to go a little off script here and just follow up on that. So as a general rule, in terms of relationship management, is the bigger challenge other lawyers or your clients? If you had to kind of rank those two sets of relationships.
I've got the mic, so I'll go first. So as a defense lawyer, the defense bar is very, very supportive of each other, and Crowns are constitutionally obligated to be nice to us. So for us, it's the clients that is the more difficult relationship management, of course, because they're going through an insanely stressful period of their life. It's quite understandable that they might be a little difficult to deal with.
I mean, I want to say it depends, but I feel like I used up my one "it depends" card already today. I'd say for me, generally speaking, the clients I work with are very thoughtful and respectful. Of course, they're concerned about their own legal issues, but generally they're confident in the fact that they've retained us as counsel or the firm. So that tends to not be the real challenge. Of course, clients can be stressed out, and sometimes explaining the inherent nuances of the legal system can be a challenge in and of itself, because often, even for lawyers, things just don't make sense. But I would say sometimes there are some instances where you're dealing with an opposing counsel who, again, I think has brought or has mistaken the idea that the adversarial should be part of the conduct instead of part of the process. And I do find that to be the most challenging part of practicing.
Thank you.
I think I still have my "it depends" card. But, I mean, truly, most of the time, the people that you engage with are excellent and courteous and civil. Most of the time, there's always relationship trickiness in any sophisticated career, and that can be true internally and externally in all kinds of different ways. So yes, I mean our clients are excellent. They're very sophisticated. Sometimes you need to juggle, what the in-house lawyer may think or need and what the business people may think or need. And there's all kinds of inherent challenges there, it's not really about people being difficult, but just about understanding where they're coming from and what they need. I agree with Breanna that I do think the hardest challenge is dealing with a truly uncivil opposing counsel or someone who, just doesn't really has a misconception about how to advocate for their clients. It's very unpleasant. It's very stressful. And it doesn't need to be that way. So it's unfortunate when that happens, and it does happen from time to time. The other challenge is sometimes dealing with self-represented litigants. And that can be extremely challenging. And oftentimes there are very real mental health issues involved there too. So, there can be all kinds of relationship challenges for sure.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting. Question 3. Did you develop an interest in or passion for your areas of expertise during law school? Or was this something that you discovered and nurtured after law school as you started into practice? How did you wind up where you are in terms of your practice area and areas of expertise?
Okay, I will start. So I mentioned before that I didn't know that media law was a thing until I realized that Blake's had a media law practice. So it wasn't something I'd heard about before. I was interested in constitutional law, but I didn't realize that there was a whole bar in Canada that's dedicated to freedom of expression issues and to advancing the public's right to know. So for me, that was kind of awesome, and I was really excited to do that work. From there, it was really about the people at Blake's who I worked with and my mentors and working with them. And that's how I started to do white-collar investigations work because, my former partner and mentor, Paul Shabas, who's now Justice Shabas of the Ontario Superior Court, had started off as a criminal defense lawyer. So he himself was both a media lawyer and a white-collar investigations lawyer, and I started working with Paul, and I suppose I kind of fell into that part of it, but I loved it and I kept doing it. So some of it is happenstance, and some of it is looking for the things that interest you, and then and actually making it known that you want to do that work. I'll just tell one anecdote, which is when I came back to Blake's as a first-year associate, my office was on the other side of the litigation floor from the media lawyers. And I thought this was bad because they all sat in a line and, I didn't want to be on the other side of the floor where no one would see me. So an office opened up and I asked if I could move to the other side of the floor. And, I think the person I asked probably thought my question was a little odd, but said I could move. And I actually think that at that point in time, that did make a difference because, I was visible. People walked by my office every day. I also expressed my interest, but looking for ways that you can, express your interest, make it known, show that you do want to work with certain people and do the kind of work that they do, I think is really helpful.
I'm trying to think. I'm like, my stories are maybe not quite as good in a way, but for me, I just kind of ended up doing what I do because I found that I liked it and I was good at doing it. I started out in practice at McCarthy Tatro, where there's a large litigation department that does a lot of medical malpractice type work and some commercial litigation. And I did my first ever injunction there in my first few months of practice and really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And that's a practice I continued to build when I went to a litigation boutique, and then just continued to build even more when I went to another big firm. And then when I moved to DLA, I made it very clear that, this is where my experience lies and this is my interest. And as part of just continuing to build and grow the work I do, it's very much of a you won't get what you don't ask for type of thing. And so if you want to be doing a certain type of work, or you want to be getting a certain type of experience, you need to, as Iris, I think, just said, make that known to people. And I think be express about it. For example, something I wanted to do was more appeal work, because I'm interested in research, reading, and writing. It's something I wanted to add to supplement my practice. I think it is something that, I enjoy. And so I went and I said to a couple of the partners I work with, this is what I want to be doing. This is how many of them I want to try to do in the next 2 years. Will you help me? And the answer was, of course, a resounding yes. But I think often when people want to build their careers and they want to learn how to work in a certain area or get certain types of work, they try to be subtle about it. And I don't think that always serves in this profession anyway, where people are often very busy. In terms of, the investigation work, part of why I enjoy that so much is that it's very much about figuring things out. And I always say that the work I do often involves misconduct as an element. So whether that's fraud, someone's stolen a company client list, I had one guy take off with some Xerox machines from a company, one matter. Long story. Where this misconduct is an element, because usually when people are doing shady things, they're definitely hiding what they're doing. And so it's a bit like someone's taken a large puzzle and chucked kind of the pieces all around the room, and you have to put it all back together, knowing that you're never going to have all the pieces, knowing that your client wants to have all the pieces, and navigating that. And for me, the interest has just developed naturally with the support of my mentors, with those direct asks for the type of work I wanted to be doing. And I think that it's the combination of those things that have really helped me get into the type of work and areas of work I want to be doing.
And I've already answered this question a little bit with respect to how I came into criminal law generally, how I came into the very specific areas that I work in. I mean, appeals makes some sense. I clerked at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal and Supreme Court, so I knew a bit about appeals, like when I went to practice. But I do a lot of, for specific areas, extradition work, fraud, and those are probably the two big specialized areas that I do, and that was just by making it known to the people that I work with that is what I was interested in. My firm gets most of the extradition files in Canada, so we get to do a lot of extradition work, which I love. I love doing the international side of things. And I just got that by telling them one day I was interested in it. And luckily there's only like 7 lawyers at my firm, so it wasn't too hard to tell them. And then same with frauds. I really love big document-heavy cases where you're trying to find that one sheet of paper that's going to save your client. I love combing through those thousands of pages of disclosure. I also, like every criminal defense lawyer, love drug and murder cases, but we don't get that many of them, sadly. So it's more frauds, and those, again, was just by telling people what I liked, and also just trying it out. I've obviously done many other kinds of cases, like impaired driving and sexual assault, and they're all fine, but they're not what interests me. And so it was more just, try it all out, figure out what interests you, and then ask for more, and there's always the work to be had.
Well, thank you. The theme I got from that is to be assertive with your employer and be express about your areas of interest. Moving on to more advice, and I know that we've touched on some of these points, but I'd like you to elaborate. Have mentors helped you navigate your way through law school and the legal profession? And if so, how did you develop these relationships? Can you offer our students any advice on how to establish and maintain these key relationships with mentors and other important networks and connections?
All right, so we're at the name drop portion of this. So I've been really lucky to have an incredible amount of mentors help me out along the way. And it almost feels like there's this string of people kind of guiding me along, and I'm just sort of following their path. One of the most significant mentors in my life is here today, Professor Dwight Newman, who He hired me as his research assistant after my first year of law school. And I think we hit it off. We worked really well together. And he was incredibly gracious and kind to me as a law student in offering me suggestions and guidance whenever I came to him, including telling me when I told him that I shouldn't apply to the Supreme Court because I didn't speak any French, that I would be stupid not to do it. And he was right, of course. And, obviously I've graduated law school, but I still count him as a significant mentor and friend, so I was so lucky to have him early in my legal career. And everywhere I've worked along the way, people have been so generous with their time and mentorship. I clerked for Chief Justice Richards of the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal when I was there. He was my articling principal. And despite him being incredibly busy and a little bit intimidating, his door was always open, and he was always so happy to chat with me and give me guidance about, I was going off to the Supreme Court next year, and he had clerked there in like the 70s. But he was still so generous with his advice about how to clerk, how to be a good clerk there, where I should be going in my career, and making any calls that I wanted him to make to firms or anything like that to put in a good word for me. He was just so lovely. And of course that extended to the Supreme Court. I have nothing but amazing things to say about Justice Brown and Justice Rothstein, Justice Moldaver, Katsanis, and all the other ones there that I worked with. They were all everyone is so supportive if you just give them the opportunity to support you. That's kind of the lesson I've learned along the way. And in my current practice, I don't know if I would call my bosses my mentors because they're also my bosses, but they're also my colleagues. And they've been so supportive in encouraging me to do pro bono work, to, investigate areas of law that may not be well paying, like Supreme Court advocacy. Very supportive in that, letting me, if I draft the factum, be the one to make the argument. That's a very supportive thing that they've done for me. How I found them, this is the part that gets difficult, because it's almost like asking someone, how did you make friends? It's something organic that happens. Not every person that I've worked with in a position of authority has ended up being a mentor to me. Not that they're bad people, it's just that we didn't click that way. And so you sort of have to navigate your way, do it organically, and see who the people are that you click well with, that you can spend a lot of time with and have sort of that organic conversation with, and then pursue that and nurture it. Try to establish friendly relationships with them. And I think the overwhelming lesson that I found is that if you ask lawyers to help, they are overwhelmingly willing to help anybody.
I think that's all right. Lawyers like to help, and they're really in the business of doing it, so it never hurts to ask. For me, I think at the law school level, something that often gets overlooked, both in a student level and in a junior lawyer or even like a mid-level lawyer, is the value of peer mentorship. It's great to have, everybody wants to work for those very senior partners or those very well-known people, but it's important to have mentors at varying ages and stages in their careers, because they're going to give you very different perspectives. And, a very good one is I often hear people say, I asked the very senior partner how to business develop, and this is what they told me. And if you're a first-year lawyer, that advice is not going to be very useful. So it's important, I think, at law school and throughout your career to have those peer mentors. And I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have many mentors, both peer and more senior to me, different ages and stages. And I think it's particularly important for people joining the legal profession from equity-seeking groups, women, members of the LGBTQIA2S+ community, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are becoming lawyers, because they can help you navigate some of the complexities that unfortunately arise in the profession. I know for me, at the various firms I've been at and at the various stages of my practice so far, I've been very fortunate to have some very excellent women and some very excellent members of the queer community step up to really support me in my practice. But I think it's important to recognize that often mentoring isn't quite enough to get you where you want to be. You need not only a mentor, but a sponsor. Someone who is going to step up to the plate, who's going to champion you, who is going to swing for the fences as many times as it takes to help get you to where you need to be. And for me, finding people willing to do that has been a big turning point in my career. I often, at some previous firms, for various reasons, which I won't get into, felt like I was beating my head kind of against a brick wall on a few things, including in my advocacy for greater equity, diversity, and inclusion in the profession and the community more broadly. But finding people in my current workplace particularly who just really step up to the plate, who are not only just happy to let me do whatever it is that I am doing, but who actively champion me, who tell people what I'm doing, who are supportive of my work and my work in the community has been so important. And having those people with you to help you take your career to the next level, whether that's in your legal analysis, whether that's in striving to become a partner at the firm, I think having that sponsorship in addition to that mentorship is truly integral.
I mean, I'm not going to repeat all the things that I agree with that have been said, but there are many. So trying to say something a little different, and for myself, I consider myself lucky to have had many mentors, but really two most significant. One, Paul Shabas, who I already mentioned, and with Paul, actually with both of them, the mentorship arose because we started working together, and we were passionate about the same areas of law, and we clicked, and all those things, and we worked together very closely, and it was also through. It was work mentorship and sponsorship, but also I think importantly, when I had my kids when I was a third, almost fourth year associate, and then a 6th year associate, and I had a lot of support from my mentors and from the firm to do that, and it was things like. Paul and I had a trial that was supposed to start when my daughter was 3 months old. And through, Paul's insistence and request to the regional senior judge that we not start the trial then, but we started another time to accommodate my maternity leave, that happened, and I was able to do the trial. And I think that kind of mentorship and sponsorship is exactly what we need and what you look for, and it's really in forming relationships. My other major mentor is a guy named Bert Bruiser, who is a late 70s chain smoking, grizzled elder of the media law bar. Bert is totally sui generis, and he was the newsroom lawyer at the Star, at the Toronto Star, for decades, until he retired at the start of COVID. So, for the first 10 years of my practice, everything I did in the media sphere involved Bert behind the scenes, I learned so much from both of them and from other mentors I've had since, that I often feel myself. In a tricky situation, whether it's in court or with a client or whatever it may be, I can sort of hear one of them kind of sitting on my shoulder and talking. And I'm not done having mentors. I mean, I co-lead our litigation group in Toronto at Blake's, and I certainly consider a number of my more senior partners to still be my mentors, and there's people that I go to for a range of issues. So I think the other thing I would say is it's an ongoing process.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those thoughtful responses. My final question before we open it up to students to pose their own questions is, what advice would you offer to your younger self if you were to go back and live out your experience as a law student again? If you were given the chance to relive law school, are there particular courses, moots, or other opportunities that you would have pursued or chosen not to pursue? Just in general, what advice would you offer to the students who are here with us today?
This is tricky. I find this to be a tricky question because we obviously never have a crystal ball. I was lucky enough to know that I wanted to be a litigator, so I took advantage of things like mooting, and I took trial advocacy courses with practitioners. And for me, those were incredibly useful in a practical sense, but also in terms of confirming that I did actually want to be a litigator. So for sure, I would encourage you to do the things that align with what you think you want to do later on. But at the same time, until you actually get into the practice, it's very hard to know. I mean, nobody sort of is sitting there thinking, I want to be a pensions lawyer, but it's a really interesting practice that for some people it is just an incredibly fulfilling career, right? And there's just things you don't even know exist. Okay, maybe there are some pensions lawyers out there, and no malignment to pension lawyers. I just mean it's not as accessible. So sometimes it's hard to know. So I would just encourage you to try different things and try things that you think you're interested in. And even if you're ruling things out, it's useful. The other sort of practical bit of advice, I wish I had paid more attention to civil procedure. I did not pay any attention to civil procedure in law school. Now, I went to McGill, which also meant that they tried to teach us civil procedure in a trans-systemic way. And McGill is an incredible law school. I loved learning common law and civil law together, but one thing that doesn't work that well is civil procedure. So maybe I came by it honestly, but I do wish I had focused more on some of that, which would have helped in my initial years of practice.
Yeah, always a tough question. And I think, like I said, I've used it my it depends card. For me, law school was great in a way. It was difficult in a way because I worked full time most of the time while I went to law school. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I was an excellent student with great attendance, because I suspect the vast majority of the faculty would tell you otherwise. That being said, I did have some excellent opportunities with the experiential learning programs, which I think are very important. So in my second year, I did not only the Jessup Moot, but also the law review and the Dean's Forum on Access to Justice. And the confluence of those, I think, are what really made my law school experience. But I just encourage you to do the law school experience that's best for you. My advice for law students is a little less law school focused, but something you can focus on for yourself is not losing yourself in law school or in the legal profession. And I find it's, at least when I went to law school, it was something that I faced, and I think many students face it. You don't have to be this notion of what a law student is or looks like, and you don't have to be this notion of what a lawyer looks like. And yes, certainly there are certain things you need to do as a student, wear your suits or wear your requirement for dress to court or whatever the case may be. But I find that many students seem to lose themselves in the idea of what they need to do to be a law student, and then later what they need to do to be a lawyer. And maybe some of that comes from the idea that law school teaches you to think like a lawyer. But the reality is that the most important thing I think that you can do for yourself during law school and during the early years of your career that I wish I would have done for myself is to continue to be authentically yourself. Because it's very exhausting to go through not only law school, but then the early years of practice not doing that. Because imagine you're not only doing a very difficult, demanding, and time-consuming job, but then you're also pretending to be something you're not the vast majority of the time. And I think in addition to all the academic work and the learning you're going to do in law school, not losing your own sense of self is the most important thing you can do for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if I could go back to my law school self, I think I'd just tell me, you'll be fine, settle down. You don't need to be so stressed out. It'll turn out fine. But would I change anything? The only thing I can really think of is I wish I took trial advocacy, because, man, is it stressful learning cross-examination on the job when it actually matters. So if you think you want to be a litigator, and a trial litigator at that, take trial advocacy. But I don't think I would change anything else. I took a moot in second and third year law school, and that was the absolute highlight of my law school experience. It taught me all the skills I needed for oral advocacy, for substantive research and writing, and more importantly, for having confidence in myself, that I could actually stand up in front of some really scary judges and do just fine. I think I buck a bit of this may be the academic side of me. I wouldn't change the number of black letter law classes that I took. I think it's actually quite important for students to have that solid, substantive legal foundation. And maybe this is my bias working in a criminal defense firm where we use our articling students a lot for research. The ones who perhaps didn't take as many substantive law classes are we can teach them the skills on the job, but we can't teach them the law. And so if you guys don't know the law, you're not very useful to us, at least as an articling student. So my advice to law students is, take as many as substantive black letter law classes as you reasonably can. And obviously within your areas of interest. I know there's some people who, you want to be a corporate lawyer, you want to be a criminal lawyer, you know that now. Obviously take those classes, but if you were like me in law school and you don't really know, take a wide smattering of them. Get yourself a foundation in all these different areas of the law. Number one, because it's going to tell you what interests you, and number two is because it's going to give you that sort of substantive knowledge base that will help you wherever you land in practice.
Thank you. Excellent round of advice there. I'd like to give those in attendance here an opportunity to pose a question. We have a mic set up on the other side of the room, so if you're interested, please make your way over there and pose a question for our panelists.
Yes, I'm up first. Well, thank you. First off, thank you very much for taking the time to share your experience with us. It's always very beneficial. You touched on these moments a little bit, but I want to know if you can go into more detail about some of the lowlights, either in your career or in law school. Who do you credit and what strategies do you credit for getting you through those moments? And if you can't think of a specific instance, what do you credit for preventing you from reaching that point?
It's an excellent question. I need to think on my answer, so if one of you two has it.
I need to think too, so I'm going to pass it around.
I don't know how I feel about this. It's a really good question. It's also a hard question. I think lowlights for me probably fall into two categories. One is, dealing with a difficult case, and which sometimes involves difficult opposing counsel, or difficult strategic issues, or rarely kind of a difficult client. And for me, getting through those has really been due to my colleagues and the ability to, walk into another office and bounce things off of people, and get their advice, and having colleagues that you can rely on is incredibly important. Even if you end up being a sole practitioner, there's a sole practitioner in Toronto who calls me every once in a while when on just a kind of a no names basis when he just needs to bounce something off of someone, and I always am happy to do it, and I totally get why he works by himself and he sometimes just needs a gut check. Like, here are my two strategy options. What do you think? That's definitely the key. There were also times in my career where balancing having a busy career as a litigator on Bay Street and having a family has been very challenging. I don't really know. I mean, I think I kind of put my head down and got through that phase. Now my kids are a little older. It's easier, and I'm at a different stage in my career. I could not have gone through that without a supportive husband. So, definitely he gets the biggest shout out. But also a firm that recognizes that it is a challenging time of life, and that you kind of have to support people through that time. And people do come out the other side. Your kids do get older. If you have other life things happening, as people do, like a sick parent or whatever it is, it's not forever. You are going to get through it. And so working at a place where you have that kind of support is incredibly important.
I think a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about the importance of having peer mentors and people you can go to. I guess for me, I actually almost quit practicing law in 2019. In early 2019, I had been having a very bad experience at the firm I was at the time. I had advocated in the community for a change to a robing room, and the firm I was at was very unhappy with that and my advocacy on social media, and it led to a lot of strife, we'll just call it, in the workplace. And I just remember that and a few other things that had happened in this workplace just made me feel like maybe I wasn't the right person to be a lawyer. Maybe I just wasn't cut out for it. Maybe I wasn't tough enough. Maybe I just didn't have the right vibe. I didn't know. I thought the profession was very toxic because my experiences over the previous years had moments of toxicity that I think were not helpful, we'll put it that way. And so I really reflected on whether I was going to stay in private practice. I'm very glad that I did, because now I'm in an extremely supportive workplace. I'm very happy. But those low moments can hit you really hard. And I think for me at the time, it was important that I had a broad and supportive network of my peers outside of the workplace, but still in the profession. And that for me was what made a difference, as well as the mentors that I had who were very supportive of me, who were senior enough to make me realize that, I can get kind of through this, not just this situation, but this work circumstance, and go on to continue to do the good work for as long as I want to, and that I shouldn't just tap out because there have been all of these problems. But I will say that the problems do arise. The low moments are different for everybody. As a woman, you will face gendered insults from people. I've definitely had some anti-queer slurs thrown my way. Those moments are always tough, and so it's important to have people you can go to, whether they are mentors, whether they are peer mentors, whether they're just friends in the profession. And it's also important, I think, as Iris mentioned, to have people who stick up for you. And I can give you an example. Recently, I was very annoyed earlier, we'll say in the last few months. One opposing counsel was just treating me extremely poorly. Just even we're talking gendered insults on transcripts. And to have somebody I worked with straight up just directly said to him, this is not acceptable, it's not professional, you're not going to be treating her this way anymore. Full stop. And to have somebody come out and go to bat for you is so important. And so that's why finding that workplace where the vibe works, where people, respect you, where you are treated as a member of the team, and where they're willing to step up to the plate for you is so important.
Yeah, and part of your question, I think, was about low points in law school too, right? And for me, obviously I did well in law school. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't. But there were low points. Of course there were. And the most important thing to me, I think, was having the peer support, because it can feel so lonely. You think you're the only person who's feeling that way, that you were the only one who got the bad grade or got demolished in your moot or whatever it was. And it's so easy to isolate yourself and feel alone. And really, I think what helped me through those moments was having a strong peer support group of people I went to law school with. We would share those low moments without judgment with each other. And inevitably, someone had experienced the exact same thing, and you kind of went through it together. And I found that in the profession, too. Obviously, as a defense lawyer, we lose far more than we win, but every loss still hurts. I don't remember my wins, but I remember all the losses. And I thought I was the only one. I thought it was kind of a personality defect of mine, but turns out everybody does that. And so defense lawyers, there's a lot of camaraderie in the bar about, yeah, this is a loss, that sucks, the judge got this wrong, it's okay, you'll do better next time. Or when someone actually wins something, it's like parties are thrown because everybody is so supportive of each other. And I think that peer support is just so important in helping reduce those feelings of isolation that we get in any low point, and celebrating the high points too. And it's something I need to work on too. We all get focused on our own lives, and I'm not that good at supporting my peers. It's something I need to do more. But yes, to answer your question, as Iris and Breanna both did, it's peer support that helps us through.
Well, thank you. I know our time is running up here, so I want to take an opportunity to thank each of our guests for sharing their stories with us, furnishing insights and guidance to our current student body. I want to thank everybody here for coming out for today's event. And I'm pleased to announce that our next McKercher Lecture Series event is being held here in this room on Monday, January 30th at 12 noon with guest speaker David Nwegabo delivering the Wanasway Lecture. So please join us for that if you can. And again, thank you for joining us. Thanks again to our panelists. Have a great day.